When I first found out, I didn't believe it. It was a typical Tuesday evening in Atlanta, where the sweltering Georgia heat seemed to press down on everything. I was on my way home from work, tired but looking forward to a quiet night in with Julia, my wife. We'd been married for 9 years, and though we'd had our ups and downs, I thought we were solid. How wrong I was. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. It wasn't anything specific, just an unsettling sensation that I couldn't shake. I entered the house, hearing nothing but the hum of the air conditioner. Julia wasn't in the living room, so I wandered upstairs, assuming she was in our bedroom. That's when I saw it. Her phone, left carelessly on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message notification. A man's name popped up. I've never been the type to snoop, but something in me snapped. I picked up the phone, hesitated, then unlocked it with a passcode I'd known for years. The message was explicit, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And there were more. Hundreds of texts. Weeks, maybe months, of conversation between her and someone named Greg. Greg. The name echoed in my mind, and suddenly, the world around me went still. My stomach twisted as I sat on the edge of the couch, reading through their exchanges. How she missed him. How their time together was the highlight of her week. She spoke about me in passing, as if I were a minor inconvenience in her otherwise thrilling life. I felt like my world was crumbling. But deep inside, something cold and calculating took over. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. Instead, I was going to make them both pay. For the next few days, I played my part. I didn't confront Julia right away, didn't reveal what I knew. I acted like everything was normal. But behind that calm facade, I was already planning. Mornings at my job as a sales consultant became methodical, routine paperwork, checking in with clients, all while piecing together a strategy in my mind. I started by figuring out who Greg was. A quick search of his phone number, easy to find through one of those online services, revealed he worked at a law firm downtown. He wasn't just any guy. He was a successful lawyer, living in a posh part of town. That gave me my first advantage. His life was perfect, and I was going to ruin it. Step 1. Documentation. I quietly transferred every message, every incriminating text from Julia's phone to mine. I even set up hidden cameras in the house. If Julia planned to meet Greg, I wanted proof. Cold, undeniable evidence. There was no way they were getting away with this without paying for what they'd done. Then came step 2, confrontation. But not yet. I wanted to wait until the perfect moment. Weeks passed, and the tension in our house grew. Julia was slipping further away, spending more nights, working late, or meeting up with friends. She probably thought she was clever, hiding her infidelity behind excuses, but each lie she told only fueled the fire inside me. I started seeing a therapist, something Julia thought was for stress. But really, I needed someone to talk to while I crafted my revenge, and it helped me think through the moral side of it all. Did I really want to hurt her? What would this do to our lives, our friends, and families? Could I live with myself after? But every time I wavered, I remembered the texts, the way she laughed at me behind my back with him, the stolen moments they shared, all while I was working long hours to make our life better. I couldn't forgive that. One evening, I followed her. She said she was going to a work dinner, but I knew better. I tailed her car, keeping a safe distance as she drove across town to an upscale hotel. My heart pounded as she pulled into the valet, and moments later, I saw him. Greg. He came out of the lobby, kissed her on the cheek, and they disappeared inside together. I took photos from a distance. They had no idea I was there. Afterward, I drove home, my mind racing. Everything was coming together. The next day, I took a personal day from work and went downtown. I had a friend, Scott, who worked as a private investigator. Over lunch, I slid the folder of texts, photos, and documents across the table. "I want this airtight," I said. Scott raised an eyebrow, but didn't pry. He knew better than to ask questions. He just nodded and promised me he'd get everything in order. "Give me a few days," he said, before heading back to his office. I was patient. I could wait. A week later, I received a call from Scott. "It's done," he said simply. I met him that night, and he handed me a manila envelope, full of everything I needed. Surveillance photos, timestamps, a complete dossier on Greg, including some rather interesting financial details. It seemed Greg was living beyond his means. Gambling debts, shady transactions, things that, if exposed, could destroy his career. I smiled. Now it was time. That Friday, I told Julia I was going out of town for work. She didn't even question it, probably thrilled to have the house to herself, or rather, to Greg. I parked my car a few blocks away from the house and walked back, letting myself in through the back door. Sure enough, after an hour, I heard footsteps. They were in the bedroom, laughing. I crept upstairs, heart pounding but calm, phone in hand, recording. As I reached the doorway, I stood there for a moment, just watching. Julia didn't notice me at first. She was too wrapped up in him. "Having fun?" I finally asked. The color drained from her face as she saw me. Greg scrambled to grab his clothes, but I wasn't concerned about him. My eyes were locked on Julia, who stood there, frozen. "Jake, Save it," I said, tossing the folder onto the bed. "You two deserve each other." Greg, still half-dressed, stammered, "Look, man, I didn't know." "I know everything, Greg. You might want to leave now," I said, my voice cold, "before I decide to ruin your life in ways you can't imagine." He didn't argue. He grabbed his shoes and bolted out the door. Julia stood there, shaking. "Jake, please. I can explain." "There's nothing to explain," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I have all the evidence I need. Lawyers are involved. And don't even think about fighting for the house. I'll win." Her tears didn't move me. Not anymore. I turned and walked out, leaving her to sit in the mess she created. A month later, the divorce papers were signed. I got the house, most of our assets, and full custody of our dog, Max. Greg's law firm, on the other hand, had to deal with an anonymous leak of certain financial indiscretions that had caught the attention of the state bar. I heard he moved out of town shortly after. As for me, I moved on. Atlanta was big enough for fresh starts, and as I settled into my new life, I realized something. Sometimes revenge is best served quietly, methodically, without a single tear shed. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.